You're listening to Lemmon's Listening Library. Discover the story behind the stories with unique and raw conversations from the people who make your favorite books a reality. All right, guys, welcome to this chaotic, beautiful episode of Lemmon's Listening Library. We are going to be interviewing 4 amazing authors, and they're going to each get about 15 minutes to talk about themselves and a book that they are wanting to share with you guys. So if you guys have any questions, make sure to put them in chat. We will get to them towards the end. We will not kind of be looking at chat very much while we're asking questions and interviewing the authors, so just know that, but they're going to enjoy all the hype and everything that you guys give them in the chat, so let them know how excited you are about their books or what they have to say, and we will for sure get to that in the end. Here we go. This is it. All right, we are going to just kind of take a minute and let some guys and ladies jump into the audience view of this, because we want people watching this. So as we do that, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Randie Lemons. I am a fantasy author, or RL Rose to those of you in the romance community. Kathy is another co-host on here. Kathy, do you want to tell everyone who you are?
Yep, absolutely. I'm Kathy Ireland. I am an audiobook aficionado. I love audiobooks. And I also do audiobook production management. So I do that side of things as well.
Awesome. And Emily, do you want to introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about you?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Emily Burrell. I am an associate agent, can't speak, at Susan Schulman Literary Agency. I represent books for all ages, but mostly right now in the cozy fantasy space.
Awesome. And Tor, would you like to tell our listeners and everyone a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Tor Tom. I'm a narrator, and I narrate romance, erotica, pretty much everything. I'm famous or infamous for saying things like good girl and passing out lip balm that says keeping your lips moist. So that's I can go on, but that's good.
All right, guys. So our first author that we...
Did she freeze for anybody else? I think so.
Yeah.
That's fine.
It does appear
What do we do?
temporarily.
Yeah, she's freezing. That's okay. I'm going to help her out here. Our first author is going to be Bobbie Lynch. Bobbie, do you want to start out and tell everybody about you?
Sure. I write under Bobbie Isabel and also Leah Lane. So I do have my spicy romance side and then my fantasy, poetry, pretty much everything else side under Bobbie Isabel. I write a little of everything. I have poetry books out and a fantasy book and even children's picture books. I have been publishing for about 2 years now. I love it, and I wish I could do it full time, but bills have to get paid.
Awesome.
I think Randy's back. Are you back, Randy?
Okay, I'm so glad that kept going because my whole screen just froze.
I got your back. We're good.
All right, cool.
All right, so Bobbie just introduced herself. I don't know if you caught that or not, but so can you just kind of tell us about your inspirations, like what got you going in writing? How did you get into this?
So I was an academic writer. I wrote a dissertation. I knew that I was going to do research and just do that type of writing. And then a friend, because I am a big musical theater buff, he was like, I want you to write a musical for me. We have all this music sitting in our backlog and I want to put it into a story. And I was like, you must be out of your mind, right? I'm not a creative writer. And he was like, no, I really think you can do it. And so we wrote a musical together. And it hasn't been out or anything, but that process of writing it and all of the poetry that was built into it started me writing poetry. And that was very cathartic. So over like a year and a half, I wrote like 800 poems. And so I've just kind of been putting them out, once a year, I'll put out a book of poems. And then I was like, okay, now I feel a little relieved, right? Let me write this book about like the most traumatic experience in my life. And it's going to be a frame story. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to write about the real situation and then the fantasy world that I created in my head that got me through it. And so I did that for NaNoWriMo one year. And by the time that was done, I was like, you know what? I'm good. And I'm in love with this fantasy story. And so I'm going to write that. And that became the Maenad. She just kind of took on a life of her own and became her own main character. And that was also when I realized that all of the tips and tricks that I learned to write academically do not work for me as a creative writer. And that's why I never thought I could write creatively. I like structure. However, I cannot outline, I cannot plot, I cannot plan ahead, because if I do, it sounds very stunted and I don't like the story and there's no emotion in it and it becomes very clinical almost. And so, yeah, so I am just a pantser and I start off with a blank page and a piece of dialogue because I also don't visualize. So I have aphantasia. I can't see anything, but I can hear conversations. And so everything I write starts with a conversation. What would this character say to another if they met at a bar? What would they say if they met at a grocery store? What would they say if he was her mailman knocking on the door? And one of my romance novels actually is that, like, what happens when the mailman actually knocks on the door. And so yeah, like it just all came from that. I wrote that musical and the floodgates opened, and in less than a year and a half, I have 8 books out.
That is amazing. I think that that's a pretty cool way to get started into it. Like, not really knowing that you had this thing inside of you that you could do, and then falling face first into a passion.
Yeah, just literally stumbling into it. And now the voices in my head will not shut up.
All right. Tor, Emily, do you guys have any questions for her?
I'm curious, since you went from academic writing to poetry to fantasy, that's a really fun wide range, but also how has this affected your reading life as well? Do you find that you read those genres differently now that you're not just focusing solely on academics?
No. So I used to be much more analytical of the things that I read, right? And now that I am not writing academically, I'm like, you know what? I don't want to analyze anything. I just want to enjoy. I just want to take it in. And so it's pure vibes. If I am reading or I'm listening to an audiobook, it is, does it make me feel something, like genuinely? Do I cry? Do I laugh? Do I get mad and want to, fight a character? Then you know what? It's 5 stars. I love it. It's great. I don't want to think about whether the writing was good. I don't want to think about anything. I love the story. It was great. And so that has changed. I don't, like I said, I don't analyze it too much. I was always a prolific reader. And so I have read so much that I think that even if I never read again, I would have so many story structures in my head from the number of books that I've read in fantasy, in romance, in children's books. I mean, I had twins, so I read more children's books than any single person, even a kindergarten teacher, should ever read. Oh my goodness. Of course it's going to start now. Sorry, my vacuum cleaner just decided that it's going to start cleaning at this moment.
How dare it do things for you?
Like, why do you have to start now? I don't understand. So yeah, like nothing really too much has changed except for that fact that I spend less time thinking about how other people's books are written, unless it's going to add something to what I'm writing in that moment, where I'm like, oh, you know what? I love how they brought those characters together. How can I do that in another place, in another world, in another time? But other than that, I finally just get to enjoy reading without my brain trying to kick in 100 times.
I love that. That's awesome.
Can I follow up on the idea that you hear characters, which I hear a lot from authors? Do you find yourself writing to the ear or writing to the eye?
So it really depends on what I'm writing, right? If I'm writing poetry, I am definitely writing to the eye. I do, put all of the poetic structures and everything in place, but I read everything that I write, I read aloud myself. So, where other people use like Microsoft and have it read back to them and all of that, I literally sit here and read it aloud to myself with the voices. Sometimes the voices are going in my head. I just finished this weekend actually recording my first full-length audiobook for one of my books.
Yeah.
I've done my poetry already, so those are already out in audiobook.
So you recorded
because I
it
didn't
yourself?
I recorded it myself, yeah.
Nice.
And so because those voices are already there, that I'm already hearing them. I'm very dialogue heavy in my books. And then a lot of times I have to go back in and add in the details. So when I was writing the Maynard, I wrote it with a lot of dialogue, a lot of conversation between characters. And my sister, who is very visual, she is the artist. She actually did the cover art for the book, which she painted it by hand. So front and back,
So
it
cool.
is all one piece.
That's so cool.
Really
And
cool.
she's super talented, but she was like, I need to know what these characters look like. Like, I need you to let me know what they look. I need to know what these trees look like. I need to know. And I'm like, but why? But why? I don't know. So I'm just like making stuff up, right? But it helped me realize that just because I hear the stories doesn't mean that other people don't want to see them and be able to visualize it. And so it helped me put that balance in there, especially for fantasy readers, because a lot of high fantasy readers expect that extensive description that makes me crazy. Like, it literally, I don't care. I don't care how green the trees are. I don't care how rolling the hills are. I don't care. What is happening with these characters? What's the action? What's the dialogue? How do they interact? What are the vibes going on in the bar? I want to know those things, but I don't really care what they have up on the wall. Like, unless it adds to the vibe. Like,
I'm a very similar reader in that, like, I love that stuff in a movie, but yeah, when I'm reading, it's like,
exactly.
set the scene, let me know, give me some sense of place, but if it's not that important to the story, I don't need to know every bit of art on the wall, as you say. It's
Exactly. People are like, when I say I can't read Tolkien, I love the Lord of the Rings movies, but I cannot get past halfway through the first book because
you guys are going to love mine and Kathy's review of The Shadow of the Gods, because that is exactly what we talked about.
100%.
I feel like he was high when he wrote it. Like, he had to have been. Everything was green. And it was green for like 3 chapters. I don't understand. But yeah, so that is kind of, when I say I hear everything, it is that conversation that's happening. And then I'm like, okay, they're having this conversation. What would that space look like? What would other people in that space be doing? How would they be interacting? But it's all built around that dialogue and those voices.
That is a great way to structure it. I mean, I love how unique everyone is with their systems, right? It's so cool to go from, because your vibe changes very drastically from someone who is very, you hear it versus someone who wants to see it. The vibe is very different. So I am so thankful for the diversity in authors and the way that they write.
And I think it makes a difference, right, in how you are able to structure your story. Because I think that people who are visual readers and visual authors, they're able to jump around, right? Oh, I wrote this scene, and oh, I wrote this scene. And then in the end, I'm going to put all of those scenes together. And I can't do that. If it does not flow logically, I can't do it. And if I skip to the end, because I did that, I have a thriller that is sitting in a file somewhere because I was like, oh, I know what's going to happen at the end. Let me write the end. And then my brain was like, oh, it's done.
Mission complete.
No, it's not. It's not done. It's not done. I don't know how she got from here to there, but
So how does that impact your editing process then? Like, obviously your first draft, you're pantsing
my edits
through.
are actually pretty clean.
Yeah.
Because I edit as I go. So if I write one day and I don't come back to it for a couple days, I read back over and I correct and I fill in as I'm reading, and then I move on to whatever the next section is. So, where other people are like, oh, my first drafts are trash and, I have to do extensive edits. No, I did more edits on my audiobook than I did on the actual book itself, I think.
Wow, that's crazy. I love all these different ways. Go ahead, Tor, I saw you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I too have an academic background, and you didn't mention your academic specialty, but I wonder, does your academic self, the authorial self, and the knowledge base that you have in your subspecialty, does it ever creep out into your characters in ways you don't want? That is, that you know certain things, you have a unique expertise in a certain area, and it's easy to give that to a character who may or may not have it. How do you control the selves when you have such specialized knowledge as an author?
That's a
That
great
is a
question.
That was a
great
great question.
question. And I don't know if it has come up as much. I think because, you know, really strange going back, right? That I was always one of the smartest kids in the class, right? And you learn really quickly that people don't like that, right? Nobody really, you don't want to be the dumbest kid in class and you don't want to be the smartest kid in class because then you stand out on either end. And so as I grew up, no matter what I learned or how much I learned or how much higher, I got, do I have a title? Yes, I have a title. My job has a title. At the end of my name, I have letters. Great. But I try really hard to not be pedantic when I talk to people, even in the professional sphere, right? So I think that because I've worked so hard at that, I'm able to shut off a lot of that might have made it into my characters. And if it does flow into those characters, it's almost as a negative, right? It's almost as if I see those things as a negative. Do I know I have them? Do I know I have those abilities? Yes. But because I have shut it off for so long, it almost goes into the negative characters than into my positive characters. It's terrible.
I have one more question for you, Bobbie. When you're doing your narrating, are you doing it in the different voices, like all different voices, and just very interesting.
Yeah, I switch them up, some more than others, of course, right? Because different age groups sound different and all of that, people from different places, I switch them up some. There are still some things that I want to work on and tweak, but I know that until I do it, right, it's going to be hard. Like when I was editing this book that I'm doing right now, I realized by the end of the book that I enjoyed the character's voice I switched into much more than what I started with. So I had to redo the entire first 3 chapters of that character's voice because I was like, it didn't sound like her. And this at the end sounded like her. And so I had to go back and fix it. But yeah, it's a new learning process for me. And so I am loving it because it's not just the everyday, I know how to do this. This is, great or whatever. But I started many years ago recording books for my students because I am a teacher by trade. And before audiobooks were really a thing, I taught a lot of kids who couldn't read, high school kids who were reading on a 2nd, 3rd grade level, but we had to read high school books. So I literally would sit the day before I was like 2 chapters before them recording the books in full so that they could listen to them in the classroom and read along.
I needed
so that they
you
could
as
participate.
my school teacher.
I was going to say, teacher of the year. Holy cow.
My dyslexia beat the crap out of me in school. So if I had you, I would have found it so much quicker. You're awesome. So kind of tell us about a book that you would like to kind of let all the listeners know about.
So this is the first book that I started writing. It is the first novel that I finished, but it was not the first one that was published. So I wrote this one and then I had to let it sit for a little while. I had to let it marinate, let my sisters who are big fantasy buffs read it and give me feedback. Like I said, the one who did the cover, she had, where are the details? Where are the descriptions? What do these people look like type of thing? And my other sister was like, why are you missing the scene? When the mom comes back, why is there no emotional scene in there? I was like, because I don't want to write it. And I have cried every time I have reread it. Like I cried when I wrote it. I cried when I reread it. And so I'm like, that's why I didn't want to write it. Like I was totally going to skip it and be okay with it. Is it a great scene? It is. It's a great scene. But so it sat for a while, and then for her to do the cover, that took some time. Like I said, it was hand painted, so all in one piece, front and back. And then I threw in a couple of romance novels in the meantime while I was waiting for this one. So this is the story of Skymera. She is a Maenad. So she is the child of a true god, and then a minor goddess from two different pantheons. And so she's the first Maenad in over a millennia, and she has powers nobody knows about, and they don't know what to do with, except for some really bad people who would love to get a hold of her to control those powers. And they have been trying to get those powers to come out of her so much that she actually had to have her memories taken away from her childhood, because she would have nightmares. And when they started to flood back after her sister was born, then she has to go on an adventure. I say, think Disney's Hercules, if Hercules had magic and friends.
Oh, wow.
So, she doesn't do it alone. She is not by herself. She has family. She learns how to depend on other people. And yeah, found family is in there. Those are her friends at the end who travel with her. She has other friends. She has other families. She does have a community that she belongs to, and she's learning how to control her powers to protect her community. So little chosen one, a little found family.
Hercules and friends. That is, I don't even think you have to, like, that hooks my attention immediately. Like, that is such an interesting combination, and I just want to know more from that right there.
Yeah.
And that's found on
Amazon. I play
Amazon?
a lot with mythology in there. It's on Amazon. It's on my website. It's in KU. It's everywhere.
Awesome. Well, if anyone wants to follow you and, keep up with your stories and stuff like that, where can they find you at?
I'm at B Isabel Writes pretty much everywhere. Sometimes there's a B period Isabel Writes, but most of the time it's just B Isabel Writes everywhere.
Awesome. You're amazing. Thank you so much for being our first author to open this up. That was perfection.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. So now we're going to move on to Ellie. Please tell me I said that right, because if I butcher your guys' names, you guys are allowed to kick me out of the show, and it's going to happen probably.
It's just Elle, but yes, hi. Nice to meet everybody. Thank you for having me here. I do have some kids in the background, so I'm sorry. I wish I could kick them out, but CPS and everything. So, I am a dark fantasy author, and I had my first book released in July. My second one is coming out in a few weeks. It is a trilogy called the Glass Wings series. Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
That's what I was just going to ask. Can everyone hear her, or is it just mine?
No, she's cutting up.
Yeah,
pretty
it was
bad.
pretty garbled, but you're back now. So
Yeah.
I can re-say it all, or are we good?
We're good. I don't think we caught any of it.
Okay.
So just, yeah.
Okay. So my name is Elle, and I am a dark fantasy author. I had my first book released in July. It's called Glass Wings. It is a trilogy. The second one comes out in December. My readers have said it's a mix of Thumbelina meets Pretty Woman meets the Marvels. So it's we don't know how to categorize it, so we're still learning, but it's essentially two timelines with 5 points of view, so there's a lot going on. We have an original species called the Canari, which are essentially the demigods of the world, and they have dragon-esque wings, and their mortal enemies, the Vray, who are kind of a mix of a demon and a vampire, and they are battling it out. And then on the other timeline, we have the female main character. Her name is Hadley. She is, this is the urban fantasy part of the book. She is in real life Sacramento, California. Her mom passed away. She's 19. She has no money. She has an eviction notice on her door. She can't find a job. This is in the early 2000s, before a lot of the websites that are popular these days come out. So she feels desperate, and she goes and she gets a job in the oldest adult profession in the world. Again, I have kids in the background, so it's really hard to talk about. But and while she's doing that, she gets kidnapped by one of these Ray, who knows her actual true lineage is part Canary, and then it just kind of snowballs from there.
Wow, that is a 5 storylines in a book cover.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. I might have said a couple of minor spoilers, but that's all in the first book, and the world just gets huge. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. So kind of what was it that, how do you balance, because obviously with your kiddos and everything else like that, how do you balance the writing and the home life?
I don't.
That's the honest answer right there, folks.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not in the camp of you can have it all. I think that your energy and like what, comes into fruition is going to be what you are putting more of your focus in. Oh, cool. I'm not the only one with kids in the background. So, but I have a full-time job. I have 2 kids. And then we're also doing like van life right now. We're traveling across the country. So it's been just a heck of a year, kind of nonstop things. We've done coast to coast twice in the last 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah. And right now I'm just outside of LA right now. And it's just, it's been a nonstop adventure. But I have a theater background as well. I'm a musical theater major, and I kind of dabbled in stage play writing. So that's really where I got my start in all of this. I never kind of went full into that. I started another business as a photographer and as a videographer. So I've kind of always been in the business of storytelling. And then as I kind of got older and, kids happened and things like that, I had like that sit down talk with my husband, and it was like, what's the one thing you've always wanted to do that, you haven't really been able to? And I've always, 3rd grade Elle has always been like, I want to be an author. So here we are. They're going to pick right now to be the loudest they possibly can be. So yeah, they were quiet when everybody else was talking, I promise.
Well.
So that's a little bit about my background and a little bit about my book.
I just want to say the traveling cross country, wow, fun and goals.
Yeah, it's been really cool. We actually did it originally I lived in Seattle, in the middle of South Lake Union on a houseboat. So I don't know if you've seen Sleepless in Seattle, but it's, kind of that kind of community. And then we had an in-law get sick. And so we decided, let's go visit them. So we sold the houseboat, bought the big fancy RV, and then went for it. When the trip was over, we were like, well, we're not really ready to go back. So we just kind of kept going.
Wow. And do you write on the go then?
I do, yeah. So I have a daily word count goal of 1,000 words a day, and I just kind of get it in whenever I can. And I spend a lot of the time of my day thinking about what I'm going to write, because I don't write in order. And I think if you ever get a chance to read my books, you'll totally understand why, because my stories are so, there's so many points of view and they're so interconnected, but it's actually much easier to write the big flashy scenes first. So I know how to build the other characters up to get there.
That's cool. Wow. Super mom. Way to just kind of make sure that you're not missing out on that. But like you said, I don't think that we can just focus on one thing without kind of pulling from another area. So you're just let's just do it all.
Yes, and I have amazing support from my friends and my family. And if anything, the thing that really suffers is my actual professional career outside of writing. But I haven't got laid off yet. So, things are going fine. Yeah. It also helps that, They just have no idea that I'm doing any of this. So
Right.
That's good.
So I'm curious, given that 2 timelines, 5 points of view, how much of your life seeps into these books with all of these different things going on? Like, where do you pull your inspiration from?
Yeah, so when I first wrote this book, it was not at all this book. And guys, can you be a little quieter? Okay. I said marvels, and then they just so when I first started writing this, it was a way of healing. I had a mom pass away when I was a teenager, and then I was like, well, what if I add wings, and what if I put her in these other, very difficult situations? And it just kind of kept going from there. And I wrote the first book in about 6 months, and then I kind of held on to it. And then I was, about 6 months later, I was ready to send it to an editor. I was like so excited. And I lost it. Like the file was totally gone. It was under one of my old businesses Google email addresses that expired, and they just deleted everything. So
Every
it took
author's
me about a
worst
year.
fear.
Yeah. It was pretty devastating. It took me a good year to recover from it. And then I think Nano of last year or 2 years ago, I sat down and was like, I'm going to rewrite it. I'm glad I did, because the first round, it was in first person. Now it's in third. And then the ending is completely different as well. So it is a totally different book than the first one I wrote, and I think for the better. So I like to think of it as a very, very polished first draft back there that I lost.
Yeah, as long as you keep the main chunks. I think, a lot of first drafts change drastically. We just don't lose it completely, which is devastating and scary.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think a lot changed very drastically. So, not letting that destroy your motivation to continue writing the story, that's huge.
It almost did. We got pretty close, but I was able to pull it back together. And then I have everything saved in 100 formats now. So I've learned my lesson.
I was gonna say it takes only once, I feel like, to learn how to back up your work really, really well.
Yeah, it's literally if you go into any of my folders, it's draft 1, this date, draft 2, this date, and it's just ongoing. It's 100 different copies, and then I have them uploaded into various writing programs, and I probably have overkilled it now, to be perfectly honest. But
can't be too careful. You can't.
Yeah.
As a dad with 6-year-old twins, I completely sympathize with your situation in this moment. So just kudos to you. I completely get it. And I'm looking over my shoulder wondering when one of them is going to try to pop into the booth here and comment. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry they're that loud.
No, it's fine. I think they're probably all parents.
I'm saying I totally get it, and just kudos to you. I have a quick question for you though. Darker themes.
Yes.
What happened? What made you want to explore that? Or was there an author that impacted you? Was there, what was the catalyst? I'm always curious. As a narrator who reads a lot of dark romance and etc.
So I wouldn't say that I had one event that happened to me and destroyed me as a person or anything like that. But I've always been really
I
just
wasn't
drawn.
asking for deep psychology. I didn't know it was the film or it was a broad question, not a personal. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I've always been really drawn to basically. I kind of describe it as the white rose with blood on it, kind of symbology of beautiful, draped with darkness, for a lack of. I haven't had coffee yet today, but just that kind of combination of this big, beautiful, magical world. So my scenes have a lot of just something really fantastical, and I think that actually comes from my early reading days of Harry Potter, the scenes in the Great Hall and things those found family moments, but all around them is something much more sinister. So I would say that a lot of my early reading has probably inspired that. And if anything is like overly too happy, I actually like cannot get into it at all.
Like, this isn't the real
so
world.
like yeah. I need like that angst, and I need that like that you know, kind of promise of like something that is coming. Like I need that suspense. Like honestly, like the whole time I read Haunting Adeline, I was like, oh, when is like the haunted house like coming into this? Like, where's the ghost? And it never came. But so I'm always kind of looking for for that like building of like suspense and that promise of you know, what's like this thing that's hiding in the dark that maybe we can see later.
Do you think that
So-
that has anything to do with like
You're fine.
your mother and kind of the situations that you've gone through in the past, that you're like, real life sucks, like real life kicks you in the teeth, and if I'm reading a fantasy world, I also want to remember that this happens to real people, and if these are real people, then they go through really crappy situations.
Absolutely, 100%. And that's like really the inspiration for like this series, because, you know, you read so many fantasies where, you know, the female main character is an assassin or she's like a badass, and like it's like super fun to read, but maybe not like so relatable to a lot of, you know, maybe women in their 30s that are not assassons. So I don't know. I'm
Are
not.
you saying
So
that's not your day job that you have? No.
no, that's not what I'm worried about being laid off from in the future. I'll let you know.
But a woman who might want to assassinate someone. You know,
Yeah, there's plenty of female rage and angst, and you know, in my writing, like no problem. But I think it's more about you know, something happens to somebody and they have no control over like the exterior world like coming down on them, but they have, you know, control over figuring out what their own internal powers are and how they want to move forward and use that without, you know, just being an assassin. Yeah.
They're just
So
one
I
penny
have
on
a
the paycheck.
question. So I have a question for you, Elle. So you read apparently like dark romance. If you're reading Haunting Adeline, so you are writing just fantasy, right? So there's no romance and stuff in your writing.
There are some spicy scenes, but it is, I would compare the way that the romance is done in my book more similar to maybe like the Throne of Glass series, where it's not the focus. It's like maybe a subplot, and readers are not going to get like the happy ending that they would get in a romance either. So it's not going to be a sad ending, but it's not going to be, you know, a typical happy ending as we've come to expect. And I actually read way more fantasy than I do read dark romance, but I will always pick up like a really popular book, and obviously another book by an indie author who has done so many amazing things. I want to study and see what they're doing. So I think that's the best way for me is to learn, is to, you know, see what's making other people successful.
Absolutely.
That's really cool. I love that you're able to kind of go from the different genres and then find the things that you like, and then just make this thing, this world that you're like, okay, I like this. Let's put this. Let's add a little spice of this. I think that that's what's really cool about authors in general, is we write what we want to read.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, where can we find your book and where can we find you?
Yes. So my book is on all of the bigger platforms online. So Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Audible. It's also on my website at ellkaelee.com. So that's ELLEKAELEE.com. And it is, you can also find me on the social medias at my first and last name, author. So at Elle Kaelee author.
I have a quick question. You said that it was on Audible. So is it in audiobook also?
It is, yes. So I worked with ACX and found a narrator through that. And they are working on the second book too, which comes out on December 27th. So we're excited.
Nice.
Yay.
So exciting.
Ooh.
I also tried to record it myself, but I couldn't get my kids out of my audio. So
Yeah, there's no feature for that yet to remove kids' background noise.
This is the part of van life the Instagram people never tell us about, you know?
it's like half of my TikToks and Instagrams are just like, okay, what snippet like doesn't have them yelling or like fighting in the background? So
Yeah. I have 2 huskies, so I feel you in how often there's some chatter going on in my calls.
Or just remember to turn the HVAC off. The HVAC is great.
I think the kids might be quieter than.
The kids are probably quieter than the huskies are. My husband lovingly took them out while we were doing this, which was really nice. But yeah, I was like, please, Twig, please, for the love of God, do not come in here and he will do just like that, like goat scream kind of thing at me. So, yeah.
Tor, go ahead. I
would
can
have been
with
awesome
the question.
to hear.
No, I was just curious. I mean, because it's now two in a row. I've recorded or attempted to record your own audiobooks, and that fascinates me from a whole host of levels about the decision to do that and like the equipment and the setup as a professional narrator. And I'm like, oh, did anybody offer any guidance or assistance, or is this just kind of did it? And I'm curious. But we can do that. We can have that conversation another time.
That's a good one. That's a good question at the end too.
Okay, I mean, I can answer my version super quick, but it's just I was a professional photographer and a videographer for about 10 years, and I was a musical theater major. So together, it just kind of felt like I knew I could figure it out.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, we're gonna let ACX do it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Of course, thank you so much. You are amazing. All right, Nichole, you ready? Okay, cool. Look, I didn't botch that name. All right, so will you kind of tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. But I do want to say it's kind of interesting how we're all so different. We've never met, but like I can, in each of the 2 authors ahead, I'm like, oh, that happened to me, or like I have that in common too.
Yeah, Ariel's not going to have anything to talk about when it gets to her.
6 degrees of separation, y'all. There's 6 degrees or 3 degrees, whatever it is. However many degrees. Not many. It's a little.
I think it's 7. I don't know. All right. So I'm Nichole Ruschelle, and I am a mom and a high school teacher also. I teach English for middle school and high school kids. And I write spicy romance novellas. I just released my 10th novella. I started writing romance novellas in 2023. So I have like I don't have all of them, but I have most of like my novellas right here.
What a flex. Like, hey, I'm an author. Here's all my books.
And I guess I should be talking more about like how I handle writing those novellas while I teach and have school-age children, right?
We just want to get to know you a little bit, and then we can dive into the books for sure. There's no structure. We just want to hear about you, however you want to lay it out for us.
Okay, so I taught elementary school before, and I have always been like involved in writing. And similar to Elle, when I hit like 35, I was like, I want to do something that makes me happy. And my 3rd grade self has always wanted to be an author. But, when you're younger, you're told you need to have like a dependable job. And as we all know, being an author isn't necessarily dependable. So I will say I give kudos to all the young women out there that do it. And like, I'd be freaking out at 24. So, I like wrote blogs when I wrote mom blogs when I was first had children.
Love the mom blog. Yes.
Yeah. It was like super popular. My oldest is almost 13. So it's like around 2012 to 2013, like 14, 15. And so like those were really, really popular. I don't know if they still are, but
go in there. You need to go in there and plug your books in there. Like, just put your little experts out to your books, and if it's still out there and moms are still looking at it, there you go.
I also have a husky. Somebody, you mentioned, Emily, that you had a husky.
Fun. Yeah.
So she also likes to yell at me a lot.
So I imagine being a high school teacher, you have, I mean, romance is happening and failing and just all of the emotions. So you're like, okay, how can I take this and then turn it into like spicy adult situations?
I mean, my favorite thing is they'll ask me about, because they know that I write books, they'll ask me, I'm like, but you're not old enough. Like, but yes, like recently I had one of my students who's like 14. She like just broke up with her boyfriend. And I was like, I know you don't want to hear this, but that's what's supposed to happen at 14. Like, you're supposed to be devastated and you're supposed to have your heart broken, but you will survive. Like, it just feels devastating right now, but that's part of growing. And she, of course, they look at me like, I don't want to hear that. I'm like, I know, but you'll look back and you'll be like, I can't believe, or, this one boyfriend I had, or whatever.
And that's kind of the great part about the romance genre, is that you do get to see a bunch of other relationship situations play out in their various, you know, paths and things.
And that's what I like about novellas too, because like I'm a huge mood reader, and I'm have learned about myself that I'm a huge mood writer also. So like within my books, I have written mafia fairy tale retellings, and now then I switched to like Brothers Small Town, and now I'm writing like a nurse's hospital workplace in a small town. And I've written recently, I just released my first hockey book. Like, I'm able to like do all of that because it's like a shorter book. And that's what I like about it.
I was going to ask what drew you to novella. Like,
I was too.
I think, what a lot of, as I represent, picture books and, I mean, all ages, but it's so interesting to me how many people think they can write a really good picture book. And it's hard, because how do you tell a full story in that short amount of time? And I think the same thing applies to short stories and to novellas. You're telling a full narrative in way fewer words. And do you find that that's a challenge that you really enjoy, or is that something that you fell into because it's what fits most comfortably with your like mood writing style?
I think I fell into it, but I have like used it to challenge myself, I guess is probably like a better way to say that. Like I said, I never wrote a hockey romance, and I like tried it, because like, what's the worst that's gonna happen? People, I'll have a new book out like later. It is hard. I tend to focus on the character development. I don't, similar to what Bobbie was saying, I'm not the biggest visual reader. Like, that's the hardest part for me, and like in fantasy and stuff, is like, it's all this visual stuff, and I'm like, can I skip through and get to like the plot? I like fast-paced books. If it's mostly fast-paced, I can read that better. So I like the novella, kind of the way the beats set up. It's a fast pace in writing and reading. And then also it just kind of fits in with like driving my children everywhere, and like fitting in deadline, like I have report card deadlines, and like I have lesson plan deadlines, and so like I'm able to fit it all in there and feel successful at the end of it.
Quick wins,
like I have a book. It might only be 150 pages, but I have one by the end.
Do you ever have books that's like your characters like, but I have more to tell?
Yes. But actually, the biggest part I have is that I have these side characters that will come out and be like, but like, I want my story. And so, but I'm done.
Well, so do you have like linked like a universe of novellas in a way?
Yes.
That's like, oh, fun.
So like, even within my books, like these 3 books are the mafia ones I was telling you about. And this one is like the Brothers Small Town. The character from this book makes an appearance in this book.
I love Easter eggers.
And then pretty much like almost I have different characters that make, like, this is my nurse one, and the characters from the Brothers Small Town makes appearances, and there's even mentions of people in like from the Mafia one.
Wow, that's awesome.
So I learned that trick from like a couple of the Insta-Love authors. They're the ones that suggested that, and I thought that is an amazing idea.
That's fun.
Whenever you made the decision to go into the romance genre and you decide, okay, I'm gonna explore this scene, you know, or like hockey romance or small town nurse hospital thing, how did you navigate as you're actually writing content? I will or won't go there, in terms of you as a person, versus or in relation to like branding as an author, like that. I don't want to be that far or that. You know, how did you situate yourself? And do you have to rein yourself in to stay on brand, or how does that work?
So I think that I'm still trying to kind of make that path a little bit and trying to figure out what my readers like. But I think most novella readers tend to want different like tropes or genre, or like not genres, but like, you know what I mean? Like hockey versus mafia versus whatever they're willing to jump around. So I tend to just like worry more about the character. I don't really worry about the outside forces other than what the problem with that specific couple is, if that makes sense. And I do give myself like a word count. Like I can't go above a certain amount, and I think that helps too. So then when I'm editing, I can be like, oh, this isn't necessary. Did I answer?
But do you ever find yourself though with a character that it's leading in a certain way that you're like, I'm just not comfortable writing that, and then you kind of, I was kind of trying to get at that, the negotiation of the spice meter, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Oh, okay. I have never gotten to the point where I'm not comfortable. I read pretty spicy and I'm pretty open to that. But I don't like it when it's in a book and it seems like implausible. Like I want the sex or the spicy scenes to be like a natural progression. So like in my Mafia book, my Mafia book was like a really big one for me. Like I don't want, like, we're not gonna have this spicy scene in the middle of like running from the bad guys, you know? Like, even though in some books that seems plausible, like in this quick novella, that's not a plausible situation. So that's the biggest thing I do. I don't necessarily have anything that I felt like it's too much as that's not plausible. That wouldn't be like a real thing that would happen.
So if you were to do the 1 out of 5, you know, flamin' hot, you know, spiciness, what would you? Yes, I could not think of the word of red pepper.
Chili pepper.
Yeah, chili pepper. Where would you rate it from 1 to 5? Yes, those things.
Okay, so I think mine are like between a 2 and a 3 because I like the plausibility aspect of it. I don't want an erotica book. So that also helps rein me in, I suppose, of what you were asking me. And I like to have some kind of plot, but I'm able to use, because I only worry about the characters and what's happening with those specific characters, the plot doesn't take me out too far.
So do you use like, because you have a very wide range of tropes that you write. So, you know, where a lot of people kind of stick to the dark romance, mafia kind of thing, or, you know, sports romance or whatever. So do you use like maybe like the sports romance, or I don't know if you do rom-coms, but to kind of cleanse your palette after you write maybe like the darker stuff?
That's how I started with the brother one. Like the small town brother, is I had written like this whole mafia one, and I was like, I kind of want to try something different that's not. And I say this is mafia, but this isn't like dark. I wouldn't consider it has dark themes, but not like a dark romance. So I think that's how I went into the brother small town, and then I kind of wanted the interconnected world. And I will tell you that I'm starting to want to go back to the mafia world. So as of right now, I'm leaning more back, like I'm ready to kind of go back a little bit darker.
Are you going to kind of expand that world that you've already written on, or is it going to be a separate world? And
so I'm going to expand the world. Let me try to. So I have this book, Green with Envy. There's some side characters in here, and I'm writing their stories that'll come out next summer. That'll be it's a duet of the two characters.
So whenever you're writing these, how long does it take you to kind of get through a story, get it out there, get it to your readers? And then a follow-up question with that is, do you feel like getting these novellas out there has quickly built your like following? Because, you know, a lot of authors are like, let's do my backlist. We got to get my backlist up. With novellas, they very quickly are able to find out who you are as an author and, you know, find out whether or not they like your style and, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So it takes me about 4 to 6 weeks if I am consistent. I publish a book about once a month, but probably about closer to the 6-week mark. I can write a good amount in one sitting if I actually sit down and write. But most of the time I'm writing on my phone, like in between sports events or whatever. And then what was the second part of that question? Sorry.
Just like building up your reader base and everything, kind of how you have them published so quickly. Do you feel like that has helped you build your readers up pretty quickly?
Oh, yes. I think that's helped a whole lot. And I think it helps in the novella world. A lot of people like either the palate cleanser or the instant gratification. So they're able to read super fast and then they can move on to my next book, or they can move on to like their darker book and then move on to try another novella. But yes, I think that having, like I said, I just published my 10th book or 10th novella. And I think like it's helped quite a bit of creating an audience base for me.
Do you have them on Kindle Vella? Is that where you...
No, I have them they're on Kindle Unlimited. So they're Amazon and Kindle Unlimited. That's all where you can find them.
Yeah, I think Kindle Vella is going away too. So
yeah,
anyone
is it really?
Yeah, I did try Ream for like a little bit. Which if you haven't tried Ream, they have a lot of great books on there. But it's harder for me to write I know this is going to sound crazy, but like it's harder for me to write consistently, to publish even a chapter. Like you have to kind of publish at least 2 times a week. And sometimes for me, because we're so busy, I don't have time to write until the weekend, and I'm writing more like 2,000 words in a weekend rather than like a couple, like 500 each day or whatever.
Emily, did you have a question?
I did, but it was like 3 minutes ago and I've totally forgotten what it was now. So. Sorry, we moved on.
I represent that comment.
Right.
Well, I had to be like, wait, what was the other part of that question?
You know, I'm just following the waves of the conversation. We're good.
Good. Oh, that's awesome. So you've kind of already told us, a little bit about all your books, which is super cool because, like Kathy said, you have stuff in all these different tropes and things. So if anyone wants to kind of get to know you as an author, they have a lot of options to pique their interests with what you write. So that's really cool. Do you have them? Okay, actually, this is kind of a question for Tor and you. Is there audiobook for novellas, even though they're super short?
So there are
there
some people that have audiobooks for novellas. I'm not at the point where I can afford to pay for that, but I do think that it's harder for people to read or listen to novella. Like, not harder, but like there's not as many, and people don't tend to, they read them on audiobook, at least from what I've heard.
Interesting.
What do you see in that, Tor?
I mean, it varies a lot. I just did a novella that's doing really well. I mean, one of the things about novellas is that if you don't want to use a credit, you can actually use cash and pay a lot less for a novella because Audible ranks them by length in terms of the price point. And so some people can get their work into the medium of an audiobook at a cheaper rate so they're at least in that sphere with even a professional narrator at a much cheaper cost. And so some authors I know I've like dabbled to get into audio first with little novellas.
Yeah.
And then you can build to the big book, or whatever you want to do.
Well, and I wonder too, with Spotify's, like you get, so many minutes with your membership of audiobook
Right.
listening. I wonder if we'll see a rise in that for people just trying sampling out novellas since they get that much more time.
And I will also say that there's been a recent shift in the ASICS policy where they're actually going to be paying more royalties to authors and others as well. And so it's not life changing, but 5 percentage points can matter as to whether or not, you do or don't do a book when you get down to the finances of it.
Yeah, absolutely. We argue for those things all the time.
Right.
But I do know, like Tor said, I do know a lot of authors that do have their novellas in audio.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What is your kind of hopes for this? Are you kind of, this is, end all be all for you? You're going to just kind of keep writing all the novellas, or are you going to try to do a bigger book eventually?
To be honest, I haven't gotten that far. I mostly write the novellas because it makes me happy. It's a hobby that I like and that I enjoy. And it's the thing I chose to do when I want to be away from my family for a little bit. And I can say, like, don't bother me, I'm writing.
So this is kind of like it's also filling your
Self-care.
cup, right? Yes, that's the word.
Yeah. Like, I just really enjoy it. I don't have any, like, expectations for it or anything like that. I think that it's great also. It's kind of my way of like showing my children, like, you're never too old to like try something too. And like if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So,
man, Nichole, you are one of the most like healthiest mindset authors I've ever.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if that's the amount of therapy I've been to or
Amen.
Preach.
Or if it's like, I mean, I do think that it helps that I started at an older age. Like, I'm 38 and I've had to deal with like real job, like real things, and my book not being viral or whatever is not like a huge deal.
Yeah. That expectation that we put on ourselves alone with just like, this is going to be the next bestseller, this is going to make the top 10, like that expectation sometimes is what defeats us more than anything.
Yeah. And like, I'm also, and this is definitely my therapy thing, but like if somebody tells me they don't like my book, I've learned enough about myself and I'm like, okay, that's fine. Like, it doesn't like hurt me.
It's a good thing there's so many books in the world for so many different types of people,
Right. I mean, there's, like you said, there's so many different, there's books that I've picked up that people are like, oh, I love this. And I read the first 5 chapters and I'm like, oh, I can't handle this.
Yeah.
Like, super angsty books are really hard for me just because it ups my anxiety level.
Yeah.
And like, I read to escape. And so I don't want my anxiety to be like up the roof. Like, there's been books where I'm like, I can't read this right now.
And now you have to also go do something else to, yeah.
Like, I can't read this right now. It's too much. And it's not even like, it's probably like and it's like usually a book everybody loves. And I'm like, oh, I can't.
Yeah.
That's okay. So where can we find your books and where can we find you on social media?
Okay. So all my books are in Kindle Unlimited and on Amazon. And then social media, I'm on I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, but I'm not as active on TikTok. But it's author Nichole Ruschelle for all of them.
Awesome.
And then my website is also NicholeRuschelle.com.
Perfect. All right. Awesome, Nichole. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Mariah, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Hi, I'm an urban fantasy and horror author. I've been writing all my life, but I really started taking it seriously like in my late 20s, early 30s, because I had a lot to get out of my system. I didn't settle down for a while. And then when I decided it was time to buckle down, my husband and I were trying to have a kiddo, and that didn't work out. So it did eventually. But for 10 years, I was not only in the query trenches, but I was dealing with infertility. So it was like rejections from agents and, the universe. So it was a lot, which might explain why a lot of my characters are super angsty. But it did all have a very good ending. I had to do IVF, and I ended up getting my baby girl right around the pandemic in 2020. And then I also got picked up by a small press when I was 42, and then they all came out at once. So I've written, I had 2 urban fantasies come out. Well, the first one came out a year ago. And then I had the first book in my urban fantasy series, young adult, come out in May. And then my newest release is a young adult horror that came out just a week ago or 2. So I've been very busy. I haven't been getting a lot of writing done because I still have 2 more books releasing next year that are book 2 and book 3 in my young adult urban fantasy series. So there's just kind of a lot. And, I have a 4-year-old now, and I'm 44. So it's a lot.
Whew, yeah. I'm tired. I'm tired just listening to that.
I'm tired.
I'm so glad my kids are grown.
Okay, but like seriously, I understand why your characters are angsty, because having a baby that you've tried for 10 years right before the pandemic, yeah, you have to have somewhere to let that anxiety out.
Oh yeah. And I was a nightmare of a child. Like, I was in the Hall of Shadows, which is my most recent release. My character, she's my most angsty character, and she's an outcast, and that's how I kind of was when I was growing up. I was born in 1980, and I'm pretty sure I'm one of those misdiagnosed kids that was on the spectrum. It is in my family, and I just was so brutally shy, and I didn't know how to act human. Like, I remember knowing I don't know how to act human, and I just eventually got myself out of it. But that was really hard for me growing up. If anybody's ever felt like an outcast, it sucks. So there was that. And then I also had a lot of stuff going in my life. I had a bad eating disorder when I was younger, and I didn't get better till I was 20. And then in my 20s, it was like all of my friends seemed to be suffering from some kind of addiction. So there's always all this stuff in my life that's like, whoa, I've had to walk through a lot of fire. So a lot of my books are more like psychological, I'd say, because I really try to get into that. Like, there's a little bit of romance, but I'm not like romance driven as an author.
Would you say it's more like self-realization, like character growth? And
very much so in all of them.
Which, I mean, is a huge theme of young adult too. I mean, is that what drew you to YA? Because you're like, all these themes are so often found in that genre, in that age category. I hate to call it a genre because it's an age group. Right. Or I guess, which came first, the anxiety or the YA?
In the Pines was the first book I wrote that I was like, this has potential. Do something with this. And that is an adult book. That is like my Practical Magic meets Original Charmed book. So they're adult. They're in their 30s, and the 2 sisters are narrating that book. And they're both in their 30s, and they're both working through things the same way a young adult would be, because we don't always work through that when we're a child, like, it just kind of, life goes by, and then all of a sudden you're 35 and you're like, whoa, how did I get here? And I still have all these issues,
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why a lot of adults do read YA.
Yeah.
Is that we might be adults by age, but I mean, there's still some shit we're working through.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'm still working through it, and I Hall of Shadows came from an idea of shadow work, which is something as a witch I do, which is addressing your triggers, addressing, all the nitty gritty things of yourself. And that's the only reason I'm still here, is because I do that, So
I love that.
So sometimes, go ahead, Tor.
I noticed that you sorry.
No, you're fine.
I noticed you had a strong emphasis on LGBTQ characters and representation. How far does that extend in your development production process? And I ask specifically, like, do you probably all seeking out presses and editorial partners who are affirming or adjacent, but do you extend that down to actual identity? And I ask that as a narrator, a straight narrator, who is often asked to do male characters. And so it's an issue that comes up sometimes that, should a straight guy be narrating, a queer character? How far do you extend that trajectory in your production line?
I think as long as you feel like you can write that, you should. I mean, like, what if a doctor character comes to you and you're not a doctor? You do your out.
Yeah.
I'm pansexual, so that's where that comes from for me. I'm a very sensitive empath, so I'm pretty much a lie detector, and I can tell if someone likes me or doesn't like me, and I can feel everything around me. So that does help. But most of my characters would be pansexual. I have had an urban fantasy that I'm actually querying right now is a straight character. And I was like, that's like the first straight character I've written. So the opposite of what you're saying, like this is just a little different. But it's really important for me to get that in my books because I came from a town in Iowa of about 10,000 people. And as a Gen X kid, it wasn't okay to be who I was. Also a witch, not okay. So I hide in the shadows for much of my life. I did not come out of any of my closets until I was 30 years old. So yeah, it's very important for me to get that out there. But I have seen criticism. One of my writer friends wrote a book where the main character was a lesbian and she's pansexual. And one of her reviews, the reader didn't like that she wasn't a lesbian. And she wrote this book. And to me, I'm like, everyone, their opinions and they can do what they want. But as a writer, one of the books that I just wrote and I'm starting to query also is a 90s horror. And my main character is a lesbian. And I'm doing that because that's how she came to me, and I feel like I can write that. So
Yeah. I mean, there is something too, as you said, right? It's like, you're not a doctor, but if you want to write a doctor character, all of it is about coming to each character with a respect for the identity that they're going to embody and an understanding of parts of them are an extension of yourself, but they are fully formed characters that have other identities too. But and not every reader is going to come to a book saying, I'm ready to read a book that's written about a lesbian character by a non-lesbian. It's like every reader brings their own experience to it as well. And it's hard. You can't please everybody.
Really can't please everybody. And that's what you have to do. Because my characters do come to me. They just gotta like drop in and I'm like, okay, so gotta find somewhere for you now, right? Like more
or they're inspired by a close friend or a relative or somebody who's experienced you maybe know really deeply on that. There's so many places that our characters come to us from. So.
Yeah, for sure.
I have a couple of questions. I want to follow up, excuse me, on Tor's question a little bit deeper. So do you have any of your books in audio, and would you, how would you extend that into the narration? Like, as far as, do you care what kind of narrator you have narrating your books?
I would never do it because I hate my voice. Like I always wanted to be a singer.
But would you have an audiobook made like from a narrator?
Yes, I would absolutely love to. Right now I'm with a small press who does not do that. This is one reason I'm kind of like back there fishing in the quarry trenches because I want to look for some new opportunities. If they offered it, I would absolutely go with it. So there's that. I kind of have limitations where I'm at.
So they won't even allow you to put it in audio?
I haven't talked to them. They do have like one option because I know one of our authors has one, but it's like it's like a robot kind of thing. I don't know exactly.
AI.
Yeah. So, and I don't know how well her book is doing with that. I don't know, but I want to have a human do it if I'm going to do it. So right now I'm just kind of waiting, till I can start walking up those stairs a little more.
Right.
Faster. you
Yeah.
know.
My other question to you is, you mentioned that you're a witch and pansexual. So is that specifically the witch part? Is that what kind of drew you to the more fantasy genre that kind of
Yes.
drew that
So
out?
this first book I wrote, In the Pines, this actually started as a book called Smackdown, and it was inspired by like the female relationships in my family and the garbage that each one of us was going through, and like how are we going to navigate this. And then I came out, like after I had already kind of been playing with it. I was like, wait, I need to be true to myself. This book is missing something. And that's when I was like, we got to put it magic in it. We got to make this an urban fantasy. So it definitely 100% had something to do with it. And like my young adult, The Lost Irwine, is about fairies, and I've always been drawn to fairies. So that has always been in my life. And when I started taking like my spirituality more seriously and getting into the fae and stuff like that, that definitely amped up that book.
Oh
So,
yeah,
and my
being able to take just real life situations or things you've gone through or experienced with it. I love authors who do that with their stuff, and they have such a deeper connection with their writing because it's like, oh hey, I've done spells, I've done rituals, I've done cleansing, I've done all this stuff. That's awesome.
yeah, in my book club, I belong to a witchy book club. And when we read, we mostly read witchy books. Like we'll do a nonfiction one month and then a fiction the next. And we kind of like to ask each other, do you think this author was a witch? Because there's a difference. You can tell. Like they loved that it was like authentic in my book, the stuff that I was writing about. So yeah, and as a witch, I love it.
That kind of ties into what we were just talking about. It doesn't bother you whenever they're not a witch, but they wrote about a
Yeah.
witch.
Yeah. Yeah.
It does kind of frustrate us when they're trying, because Hollywood has kind of made us sound evil and stuff, and that we believe in or we worship the devil where we don't believe in the devil. So sometimes we read a book and we're like, kind of annoying, but it's her story. Like, I'm like, this is that author's story. And
Yeah. It's
that's
always really fun too when you find, especially in like the herbalism side of witchcraft, which I'm really into. It's always really fun when you're reading a book, a fiction book, and they're like putting in real herbal remedies that have been used for, generations and generations. But it's just like, oh, it's just in this cute little fantasy novel. It's nothing here. And then you kind of go back and start researching, and you're like, thanks for the tips.
Right? Why is it post-apocalypse happening and you have a fantasy book with you? Like that doesn't make sense if you know what I mean? Like you get a book like that where you have tips to how to survive with herbals and stuff, but it's a fantasy book because they know what they're talking about.
Exactly.
Oh, that's awesome. So you found, I think, writing through like this very beautiful way of like life has kicked you in the teeth, life has kind of sucked, and now you have these stories and you can get very authentic with how it sucks and how to overcome it for your characters, which is huge. And I think, that says a lot about working through your stuff, right? Because as you kind of have that stuff happen to you and then you work through it through writing, that is such a healing process. I don't think authors realize it as they're doing it, but as they write their stories out and as they kind of put these characters through things that they've gone through or, have similar feelings and emotions, you heal pieces within you without even realizing it.
That's very true. Yeah, I always like, it's kind of, if anyone's ever been to a meeting, you realize quickly that you have to work on the stuff that you can change. And that's where my characters are, because there's so many forces in the world, within ourselves, within our families, our loved ones, whatever, that you cannot change. You cannot, like, I have had so many close people to me deal with addiction, and myself too, so it's like, there's limitations, and you just have to do your best, and you have to work on yourself, put your oxygen mask on first. And that's really what all of my characters have to figure out, because they're crazy. So
I have a question for you, and I know Emily will appreciate this too because we're both really big fans of YA. How and showing really hard life situations through young adult perspectives and having them go through it. How dark do you get with like the nitty gritty of what your characters go through?
I get pretty dark. In Hall of Shadows, that one gets pretty dark. In The Lost Irvine, though, it's quirky. So I deal with a lot of what my characters are going through with splashing some humor on it. But there is, it's still taking it seriously at the same time. It's this like practice of, okay, it got pretty dark. So we have to find a way to raise our spirits and raise these vibrations, that kind of thing. So that's what I did in The Lost Irvine. But I will say this, in the next two books, it does get darker and darker, kind of like Harry Potter does, like as it goes through, like there's little reprieves with the humor, but we're going to darken it a bit. We're going to pull the shades. And in Hall of Shadows, it's obviously taking place in the shadows. Hall of Shadows is about a cursed deck of oracle cards that opens up into 13 dimensions of shadow work. And my character has to go through this whole reading, and she can't leave until the reading's done. So, and there's definitely some monsters involved in there.
Oof, I'm getting like Agatha All Along vibes in the best
Yes,
way.
I just watched that and I was like, oh, I mean, it's a totally different story,
Right.
but I was like, similar in some ways.
Yeah.
So is it really YA or is it more adult?
It is YA, but I write all of my books so that everyone can enjoy them. But take out like some adult stuff. Like I don't write advice anyway, and it's a horror, so it's not about romance. But I keep it tame enough that it's okay. My character is 15, going on 16, so definitely like why it's YA, and she's dealing with, even though she's not quite normal, she's dealing with a lot of issues that teenagers deal with, especially.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. I love YA. It is such a beautiful genre. I don't hate when people hate on it because that's their thing, but I hate when people are like shaming other people for enjoying it. Like that's what sucks. Like, let them enjoy what they enjoy.
Yeah, all books are fair game, I say. I mean, I can't remember who said they were a mood reader too, but I'm a writer. I'm also a mood writer and reader. Yes. So it's like, it just goes where it goes. You read what you want to read. Like I read across the board. The only thing I don't really enjoy is nonfiction, just because I don't know, ADHD and the 4-year-old. I don't know, but I'm not opposed. But you really got so. But I think it's really important to read everything because it's like a manager who never goes onto the floor to make sure that everybody's doing their work. Like read and see where,
and reading makes you more empathetic. And so it's like the more diversely you can read, that carries out into the real world, and and it's wonderful.
I don't know how you guys can try to talk me into the scary books all you want to. I don't know how I'm gonna actually do it though. I'm gonna need lights
it's
on.
It's a hard no for me. That is a absolutely no.
I would. My sister and I like relax to true crime and horror, like gore. I don't write gore. It's more psychological, like I've said, but I like gore.
And something that I often talk about is, in repping kids' books and stuff, is like we need that darkness in stories because it's so important to watch a character go through it and come out the other side and know like they survived that. And so, going back to writing through your trauma, right? It's like you're putting a character in a space that you do have more control over, and you can sort of go through this thought exercise of how to navigate through whatever trauma it is that you're working through in that book. It's a safe space to experience terrifying things.
It is. And I like to show both young adults and adults that how to fight back. Like characters are kind of like, what is happening? I don't know how to do this, and I have to show them how to fight back.
Awesome.
Do you find it difficult or easy to differentiate between feminine horror and masculine horror, and the experience of terror across the genders?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
I'd say it just comes naturally. I mean, I am woman, hear me roar, but I definitely have a masculine side, and I always have. So I guess I kind of write, I don't know, just right in between that. Especially for my actual horror. Like, yeah, my other ones might be a little more feminine, but in the horror, I'd say it's safe right in the middle between masculine and feminine. Because my character, she's figuring everything out about herself. She doesn't even know what sexuality she is. She's never been attracted to anybody. She's not sure if she's asexual or what. She's trying to figure everything out. So, yeah.
Yeah, I ask because in romance, male characters are often written female, right? Because it I mean it's a female author space,
Right.
right? I mean, like 99% women, but actually getting inside, and men are more complex than people think they are, but getting inside a male in terms of romance and sexuality is an extra feat. And so I wondered, in a genre shift, you know, because horror is a little different, I think, for men, depending upon who they are and whatever. And I just was curious.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I do too, because when I was younger, I did act in a lot of play stuff, and I did a lot of improv. And so when I have a character that I might be having trouble with, which doesn't always happen because it's just, they kind of just come fully loaded, like they have all their baggage with them. But if I do have trouble with someone, I just get into their character, like I would if I were going to act them out on a play. To do. So if I were to like have that issue writing a male, I would just get inside his head, which isn't a problem for me. Might be weird, but for me it's not.
No, I love that. That's super cool. That's a good question, Tor, though, because we read some romantasy books like Connor Crace, he writes his, and I love, you can very, very deeply feel the male side of like, yeah, he even though she's sick, he still wants to, you know, have his way with her and stuff. And it's like, yeah, that's a dude. That's a totally a dude situation right there. Women would be like, no, go wipe your nose. That's gross. I love that. Mariah, where can we find you and your books?
So pretty much my books are online wherever books are sold online. They're in some stores, but yeah, indie author. This is my newest release, Hell of Shadows. That's the one about the cursed deck of oracle cards. So all of those you can find. My link tree is just Mariah Stillbrook. So you can look me up there. You can find all the links to all my books. You can find all my socials. I'm on TikTok, Insta, Blue Sky, Twitter, still Twitter. I don't know, I'm going to say. But yeah, Threads, all the things.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Of course. All right, Ariel, are you ready for this?
Sure.
Sure. All right. I know that we said in the beginning that, by the time we get to you, there's going to have all the things talked about, but we know you personally, and we know that you are very authentically yourself, and you have a lot more to tell us.
As always. So, hi, I'm Ariel Dawn. I write primarily paranormal romance, monster romance, urban fantasy, but I kind of write a little bit of everything.
So what got you into writing and kind of going down the path of like, I want to be an author?
So for me, I'd always wanted to be an author. I think as long as I can remember, just like making up little interviews and things in my head, like what would they ask me if I wrote a book about this? But even though I had all those dreams of wanting to do it, I had some self-doubt because I have ADHD. And I am notorious for starting projects and not finishing them, as evidenced by my cricket in the box downstairs that's been in the box for 3 years. So when it came to writing, I decided that I wanted to try to write something. I wanted to be published. And for me, I'd been working on books for 10 years that just were never going to see the light of day. And so I kind of told myself, well, maybe I could try to write something new, and then maybe that would help, and then maybe I could finish it. So I signed up for an anthology to write a short story because I thought maybe a deadline would help me, and it did, which now deadlines don't even get me started. But for the first book, the first short story, it definitely helped. And it was just kind of like overcoming that fear of, well, what if I'm not any good at this? What if nobody likes what I'm writing? What if I completely suck? What if, right? And then I just had like my little light bulb moment where I was like, well, what if I did it anyway? And I did. So.
That's still one of my favorite things. What if I did it anyway?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's the Ariel Dawn motto over here. What if I did it anyway?
But I mean, it's kind of its own superpower, right? Like, of just
It can
like,
be.
I mean, that's taking that, like, but what if I fail, and turning it on its head, and that's a powerful moment.
It was, and it really changed my life, because I was able to not just write that story, but through writing that story and realizing that I could finish something was like this huge gate that opened up. Like, oh, maybe I can do something. Maybe I can finish a project from start to finish. And then once I had written the short story, the linear progression was, well, maybe I can write a book. And I wrote in the cards. That was when the pandemic hit. So really, it kind of all kind of meshed together at the same time. And I was able to really kind of like tune in every day and work on my book. And that gave me a lot of purpose, and it gave me a lot of focus that, like, okay, I can do this. And that book was in the cards. It came out in October of 2020. And by January of 2021, I had gotten hooked up with my publisher. And I was on my way to writing a zillion books.
I do always love when you talk about this, because what a way to talk about identity. Because with ADHD, the stigma with it is we don't finish anything. We jump from project to project. You kind of are a pantser with life, and nothing kind of really gets finished. And so when we believe that identity, and we're like, okay, we're ADHD, we have ADHD, but also now that comes along with, we jump around from projects, we don't finish anything. If we consume that identity and believe that identity until you have a moment where you're like, I'm going to test it. I'm going to test if this is true. And then you test it and it's like, oh, hey, wait a minute. That's not accurate. I can finish stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes I always like to say, at least for me, my ADHD is a blessing and a curse, because there are so many times I'm like, yes, we can do all the things, and we can do this project, and we can do that project, and look at me hopping into this book, and look at me hopping into that book. But then there's other times where it's extremely stressful, and it's the curse, where it's like, I haven't written in this book and it is due in 2 weeks. How am I going to get this done? I always get it done, but maybe not in the healthiest way possible, but I do always get it done, so I never learn my lesson.
What has driven you to choose like the genres? Because I know you do write in a bunch of different genres, but what has kind of driven you to choose those? And I know that you do reverse harem as well, so I want you to touch on that too.
So for me, it started out being more, when I started writing, I just delved right into paranormal romance because that's where I'm most at home. I grew up with Buffy and Xena and Supernatural, and like all that stuff is, an intrinsic like part of me. So I started kind of into paranormal romance, but I kind of branched out into other romances. I want to say maybe like my third or fourth book was a reverse harem, White Shoes, which I had not read a ton of before I started writing. I'd read like maybe like 2 books, and I was like, I love this. Where has this been all my life? And I started writing it. And one of the things I really love about writing that particular genre and just mixed pairings in general, because I write all pairings. I might have started out doing more male-female stuff, but I have gravitated towards doing White Shoes, male-male. I have some sapphic stuff on my calendar that I would love to eventually get to and put out. Menage. I really love writing love, no matter what level we're on. I love experiencing and putting in all the different details, and kind of like how some other people have touched here, getting into my character's headspace. I have a theater background as well. So I feel like, too, when I'm writing characters who maybe, are a little bit not like me, that there is an empathic thing about it into understanding people who are not like me. So, and that's one of the things that I love, again, about the universal quality of writing love and people, not necessarily writing pairings, but writing people.
Well, and also not necessarily writing identities, but writing people, you know?
Right.
Yeah. I am really curious about, like, because I feel like I'm seeing a huge rise in not just like the Buffy vampire paranormal, but like monster romance and just like and totally not even like humanoid monster romance. And I am so like curious about what draw. I don't know if you go in that far into the paranormal romance, but like what draws and what do you think about that as like just like a rising trend and like. I don't know. I'm just curious about it as a reader and a person that's just like, oh,
I am a monster romance girly. I love it. My monster romance, Monsters of Ashwood, which is my best-selling series. I love monster romance because I love this idea, and I think it kind of goes back to fantasy stuff as well. It's this personification of what it means to be a monster, what it means to be other, or what it means to, you know, have monstrous feelings or, you know, powers that you don't understand or that you are stuck as one thing when inside you are another. That's one of the things I love about monster romance, but of course, I wouldn't be a monster romance lover if I didn't say I don't love the spice as well, because obviously the spice in monster romance is unparalleled. And I think there's a bit more fun, at least for me, when I'm writing, because a lot of times I write shifters or I write monsters who shift or who may have or may appear as human. I haven't gone fully into monster yet, but I'm getting there. But as of right now, I have like in Monsters of Ashwood, I have a cryptid, which is something I don't see a lot of because I'm huge into like cryptid lore and stuff like that as well. And my cryptid actually appears as the thing you're afraid of most. So
explain what cryptid is just real quick.
So cryptid is basically like if you think about like your Slender Man, you think about Hide Behind, you think about the voice in the Appalachian Mountains that you don't want to respond to, the skinwalkers, all that fun stuff. So like the urban legend type monsters. Bigfoot, everybody loves Bigfoot. He's pretty popular cryptid. Mothman, who's my favorite.
No, I mean, there is an explosion. I mean, I'll say this from my end in terms of what I'm seeing as a narrator in monster romance and alien romance. And we talked briefly, excuse me, whenever I was talking with the ladies about like these adult novelty toys are now at Spencer's at your local mall, just outside your Dillard's, your JCPenney's, right? So there's definitely a shift, and I'm just genuinely curious because there's a lot of stuff going on gender-wise in the world today, right? And yet when you get into these monsters and aliens, the boundaries of consent and forced captivity, they get bent and twisted in all kinds of ways. And I'm fascinated psychologically by that. Like what is going on, and is there a space to play if they're not human? And I will also say, just as a narrator, it's a lot of fun when you're like a two-penised alien with tentacles, because when you say things like "I want all the horns," it means something different if you have all of that accoutrement, you know, than if you're just a human.
I love it.
It hits different.
It definitely hits different. It's twice as different.
Or 3 or 4. And I'm like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Whoa.
And I also wonder how much of it is a response to the would you rather be in the woods with a bear or a man question, you know, and like to piggyback off of that, that whole question tour is like, it does feel like the monster romance is playing with so much of these things that if you were to try and do any of these plot lines or steamy scenes in like a just human male female, it would not go over really as well.
Right. And I think that's one of the interesting things, at least to me, about writing romance, not necessarily about monster romance specifically, but you could definitely apply this to it, is that there's a safe space to be able to explore those things in a way that is like a little bit more of like vicariously, right? where you're like, okay, like I know for me specifically, reading monster romance, like I tend to read more of the darker monster romance stuff. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm a very giggly, bubbly person. You would not know that by my Kindle Unlimited reads. So I think that, and other people have kind of brought this up to me too before, there's a sense of being able to experience it vicariously, in a way that feels safe and like this is okay, and is also empowering too, which is one of the things I think that is big about writing romance, but specifically when we go into the monsters and the aliens kind of realm. I do feel like because they are monsters or they are not human, there is definitely a little bit more space to play with those things, but also we're still personifying them with human traits anyway. And it's that show of just because they are a monster or just because they are an alien does not necessarily mean that they don't have feelings or that they don't have their own hierarchies or their own traumas or whatever have you. So I feel like in a sense, it almost like makes it a little bit more like we're able to, even though they're not human, that we have that ability to relate to them because even though they're not, we share the same mindsets or we share the same, the same thought processes.
I wonder too, along with that, if it can also go to the other side because a lot of people read fantasy and they're not human, they're fae or they're demons or whatever. And then they get pissed off because the guy is an a-hole. Well, he's a monster. Like he's fae. Fae are a-holes. Like that's how it is. You can't, and so it's kind of, I find it interesting how readers kind of hold the characters in these fantasy books that are not human to a human standard. And it's like, it's fiction, y'all.
And
like
see,
it's fiction.
That's one of the things I love to play with. And you'll see that in a lot of my books is the theme of who really is the monster. So I think a really good example is in my Elle Kaelee series, that, you have the Slayer and you have the vampire, and the way that series is written, Cassius the vampire is, for all intents and purposes, he's the good guy. Like he's led a very long life. He hasn't always, done good things, but he is, for better or for worse, he is the good guy. He saves Ava, and Ava is the Slayer, and she's the one who's killing people on the daily. And it's that whole, there's moments between
just
them
because
where,
of them being a vampire.
Right.
Only.
So it's like he even comments on her bloodlust because she's a little bit, unhinged at times. But I love playing with that. You get a lot of that in Monsters of Ashwood too. My female main character, Jenna, has a very troubled past. And there is a moment in the second book where she says, "Oh my God, am I a monster?" She's not, and monsters are like, we're all monsters. You know what I mean? So I love playing with that duality as well. It is. And it is. And that's why another reason I think that, like, especially, I know romance a lot of times gets a bad rap, because people are just like, ugh, oh my God, romance. They think of like Harlequin and, and they think of like all, your grandma's romance or whatever, Fabio on the covers. But romance itself, because of what it is, lends itself to so many different narratives and so many different ways to model certain situations. Or I think somebody else said earlier how sometimes you can kind of like, you put a little bit of yourself into what you write, but also modeling like maybe this is the way it should go, because we're so used to things going another way, and having that representation and being able to give that safe space, to be able to deal with those societal pressures or things going on in the world. A lot of the books that I've read that have had romance in them have been some of the most poignant, soul-shattering books, that make you think. So you can find my books pretty much everywhere. I am on Kindle Unlimited. I have books that are wide on Barnes and Noble. I am pretty much on all the social medias. I just got Blue Sky and Threads, so I'm on there. But I spend most of my time on TikTok and Facebook and Instagram. I do have a Bookstagram called Wrong Turn Romance, and I will be doing my holiday movie reviews on there this year. And I also have an Instagram, ArielDon5, that I just opened up for my author stuff. But I'm pretty much everywhere. And you can find me also on the L3, Learning Lemons Listening Library podcast, because sometimes I co-host on there. And I'm pretty much everywhere. Oh, and I have an appearance tomorrow night on Go Indie Now with Joe Compton for 21 grams. So I'll be there too.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us on this episode of Lemons Listening Library. Remember, every story has a journey, and every journey deserves to be heard. Keep reading, keep writing, and keep listening.